Order, order. Andrew Bridgen to move the motion. Andrew.
Thank you, Sir Gary, and it's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would like to start by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for scheduling this debate, and to the 17 colleagues from across the House who supported this application for a debate on the trends on excess deaths, following on from my adjournment debate on the 20th of October on the same issue. Sir Gary, the eyes of history are upon us. Every generation looks back in wonder at the incredible mistakes of our forebears. They will ask questions such as how could they possibly realise how wrong they were? What on earth happened to them? Why did they ignore the evidence for so long? Their values and every opportunity to learn from the mistakes of yesteryear. What madness captures men? From 2010 to 2019, annual death rates in England and Wales oscillated between 484,000 and 542,000. In 2020, there were 607,000 deaths, 65,000 more than the maximum in 2018. In 2021, there were 586,000, which is 44,000 more than the 2018 figure. After such a rise, there should be a deficit. A significant deficit. In fact, because sadly, our most vulnerable and elderly, who might have lived a while longer, were taken from us early. But in 2022, there were 577,000 deaths in England and Wales, and in 2023, 581,000. A huge rise when, in fact, a significant deficit would and should be expected. The deficit, and then some, has been filled not with the extremely old and the extremely vulnerable, but with others, many, many others, who were often young or in the prime of their lives. You might want to ascribe the excess deaths in 2022 and 2023 to the virus, but that would be a mistake. That's not what their death certificates say, and moreover, there are far too many young people dying. Far from being below the recent rolling average, excess deaths in 2022 have been above, 6% above, in fact. In 2023, when one might expect deaths to finally fall below the average, the excess has also been 6% above. These numbers are higher in the younger age groups. No one with integrity can fail to be troubled by these figures. What actually is going on? And that's what we need this debate for today. It's a problem that affects us all. It affects every community in every constituency across the country. And I would like to thank all the honourable and right honourable members who've attended this debate today. And I think we need to thank the public for their interest, which has stirred the interest of colleagues. And I'm very encouraged by the turnout for today's debate, which is considerably better than we've seen in the past. Not everyone in this room will be comfortable with analysing scientific data and figures. That is not my position. I was fortunate enough to take a degree from Nottingham University in biological sciences many years ago, and I specialised in biochemistry, genetics, behaviour and virology. I'll give way on that. Yeah.
It's a very important debate he's having. In 2022, we saw nearly as many excess deaths across the UK as during the Blitz. And in my own region of Yorkshire, every single year since the pandemic, we have had excess deaths. And my constituents are very concerned by this. But what they're also concerned about is almost a deafening silence from the NHS about what is causing this, why it's happening, and what they're doing to alleviate this. So I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing this very important debate today. And only by talking about it can we actually get to the root cause of what the issue is, because there clearly is an issue.
Well, that's the whole point of a representative democracy. We're here to raise the issues on behalf of our constituents and to look after their best interests at all time. I thank the honourable gentleman for his attendance, but we had enough signatures for a 3-hour debate in the main chamber. We're actually giving a 90-minute debate in Westminster Hall, which I did mention to the chair of the Backbench Business Committee I felt was a bit of an insult, given the gravity of the issue we're debating, to those who've lost loved ones over the last few years. And I'd also like to... I'll give way.
I'm really grateful to him for giving in. And he's right to point there is considerable concern about this issue. And due to that concern, does he agree with me that we should be using the most accurate data available and using the data set of the age standardised mortality rate, which takes into consideration growing population and an ageing population.
Of course, we should be using the most accurate figures that we've got. And later on in the speech, in fact, near the end, I'll be talking about the data that we really want, which could settle this matter once and for all beyond reasonable doubt. So I thank the public for their pressure and their interest in these statistics. And I thank the people who've attended today in person and the thousands and thousands who'll be watching on the television or online. There is a burning question, Sir Gary, at the heart of this debate. This is, after excess deaths, there should be a deficit. Where is that expected deficit? When will we have it? And worse, why is the deficit not being filled but significantly exceeded? And why are the institutions whose job it is to notice these matters, to record these matters, to publicise and call attention to these matters, why are they all apparently asleep at the wheel? And the second burning question, which I'll come to first, is why is no one listening to those raising the alarm? The research and analysis of two of Britain's most trusted doctors provides us with alarming clarity. Only this week, Sir Gary, the director of the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford, Professor Carl Hennigan, reviewed the causes of excess deaths and concludes that they are predominantly related to cardiovascular disease. He told the Sunday Express newspaper, this cannot be explained by COVID, population growth, or an ageing population. Consultant cardiologist Dr. Asim Malhotra, who is a world-leading expert in the causes of heart disease, also told TNT Radio yesterday that even though cardiovascular disease is multifactorial, the top of the list in the hierarchy of causes behind excess cardiac-related deaths has to be the experimental COVID mRNA vaccine until proven otherwise. And this is not speculative. No. I won't give way at this, but let me just finish this trial and I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. This is not speculative, but based on the highest level of data, which combines plausible biological mechanism, randomised controlled trials, high-quality observational data, pharmacovigilance data, autopsy data, and clinical data. And those who choose not to acknowledge these cold, hard facts, Mr. Sagari, are either unaware of the evidence, willfully blind, or lack a conscience. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way, and I'm grateful for him shining a spotlight on this important debate about excess deaths. But I'm just keen to understand the difference between correlation and causation, because there's a correlation between eating ice cream and sunburn, but we don't necessarily assume the two are together. Yeah. It could be sunny weather. The same goes for this case. Is it to do with the fact it's lockdown? Is it to do with late presentation, access to the NHS? These are the key bits to try and understand the causation and correlation, to understand why these numbers are so high.
I agree with the honourable gentleman. He is a medical doctor, so he does have some knowledge, clearly. But correlation is not causation. But correlation is an alarm bell, Sir Gary. And alarm bells are going off all over the building, but no one wants to open the door and see if there's a fire. I believe that future generations will ridicule us for what we've just done in response to a seasonal airborne virus. We apparently lost our collective minds. We've imposed a brand new type of quarantine on a healthy population, in breach of all previous public health advice, in breach of our own carefully crafted expert pandemic plan, in breach of flagrant breach of the sensible and experienced advice from many professionals. Those noble dissenters are being vindicated one by one, inevitably so, as the suppressed, shaming real-world evidence finally emerges. I'm not going to mention those who harass and discredit and ridicule the dissenters. They loudly paraded their egotistical virtue on social media, in the press and on television. I know exactly what harassment feels like. And we inflicted social distancing, masking, and school closures on healthy children at no risk from the virus. We did this to protect adults at the expense of our children and their social and mental health. People raised alarm, Sir Gary, but nobody listened. A society that consciously and knowingly sacrifices perfectly healthy children for adults is sick in itself. Our time, this time, will not be an era that's looked on well by future generations. That is going to be our legacy. And I call on this House and those in authority to right this grievous wrong and right it quickly. With unbearable cruelty, we isolated even those who would gladly have made the individual choice to see their grandchildren. And worst of all, we bypassed all the procedures, all the protocols, and all the science to inflict on a healthy population a brand new and untested product that had never before been used outside clinical trials, never mind approved. There was no long-term safety data. The safety analysis in the trials was 8 weeks, and then the control group was vaccinated. No age stratification for recipients of an experimental medication for an illness with an average mortality age of 82. No liability under any circumstances for the manufacturers of these experimental treatments. Furthermore, there were good reasons, based on the science known at the time, why these products might be harmful. Ridiculous future generations may come to loathe us. We will forever be the poster boys and girls of a society that collectively lost its mind and lost its moral compass. They will hang this millstone around our necks for eternity. And what's the flaw in this human nature that latches on to things and destroys all before it? It's been dubbed by some as the madness of crowds, or a kind of mass formation psychosis. The sort of thing that allowed China to commit population Armageddon with the one-child policy for decades. The sort of thing that allowed us to have millions of cattle slaughtered during the apparent foot and mouth outbreak, where we persuaded not by the science, but by plausible patter of provable idiots like Professor Neil Ferguson. Yes, the very same. His advice led to the bankruptcy, the immiserisation and the utter despair of countless farmers forced to destroy their own livelihoods in a futile attempt to prevent the spread of an airborne virus, a virus that had already managed to pass in the air all the way from France to the Isle of Wight. So how many times must the so-called experts be caught literally with their pants down as their models fail yet again? How long must we be subjected to debunked dribble being dumped in our political discourse? How long must decision-makers deal with discredited modelling and moribund and captured institutions? And why will no one listen to reason when they've been proven wrong so many times? And there are plenty of other examples in medicine, from bloodletting with leeches to pointless lobotomies to not washing hands between the mortuary and the labour ward. Doctors and scientists are far from immune to groupthink, and the current batch are living proof. I'll give way on that point.
To the Honourable Gentleman, and this will not be the first, or I suspect the last government in history not to follow the evidence when it comes to difficulty. But when governments make mistakes and protect themselves and don't look at the evidence, we as a democratic society should expect there to be an inquiry that establishes what has happened and what should have happened and what should happen in the future. Does the Honourable Gentleman agree with me that the inquiry that we have set up is failing in its task in doing that job, and it is assuming that lockdown was right from the beginning?
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for that intervention, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. This is not a political issue. This is a public health issue that should affect every constituency in the House. I think we know that the so-called COVID inquiry has already set itself out the answers it wants to get to. It has all the appearance of a whitewash, and clearly it was deeply disappointing this week when they announced that the module to do with the safety and efficacy of the vaccines has been put off indefinitely, certainly until after the next general election, which is extremely disappointing. And another instance I could talk about is that I contacted every public and media body I could think of in 2014 to tell them again and again that the sub-postmasters were innocent. But no one listened. And I knew that sub-postmasters in my constituency were completely honest. Anybody who knew these pillars of society knew it. The innocent were falsely accused of dishonesty over the Horizon scandal, and they were relentlessly pursued by a merciless, mendacious and malicious bureaucracy. And it's the coldness that shocks most, Sir Gary, the imperious arrogance, the mercilessness that captures institutions and cowards in authority when a single narrative closes our collective minds to nuance, to experience, to the inconvenient truths, No one listened to the sub-postmasters. No one cared. No one in power moved a muscle to help. But now, all of a sudden, one media programme has shifted the narrative to reveal that the experts were wrong, that our institutions were wrong, that those in authority were wrong, and that an infallible computer system was in fact fallible. Even our justice system got it so tragically wrong, with thousands of court hearings and judges making wrong judgments. Will the post office lessons be learned regarding the COVID insanity? So who's actually dying now? Well, it's not the old and frail, as it was with COVID. In fact, the deaths from dementia, a key benchmark of elderly deaths, have been in deficit ever since COVID, as we would expect after a period of high mortality. Instead, particularly for cardiovascular deaths, there's been an incessant week-on-week excess mortality for months and months in the young and middle-aged. Every age group's affected, but the 50 to 64-year-old age group has had it worse, and I'll declare an interest. They have been stricken with 12% more deaths than usual in 2022, 13% in 2023, and at least 5 out of 6 of those deaths this year have nothing to do with COVID whatsoever. My constituent, Stephen Miller, was a healthy IT engineer in his 40s. He had 2 doses of AstraZeneca jabs in the summer of 2021 and was ill very shortly afterwards. His side effects were so bad that he lost his job, and in November 2021 he was rushed into hospital, and he now has cardiomyopathy and has ventricular failure with a maximum of 5 years to live, taking him to 2026, unless he has a heart transplant. And when I saw him last, he had a resting heart rate of 145 beats per minute. He subsequently has lost his partner and access to his child and is at risk of losing his house. He now has a diagnosis from Glenfield Hospital in Leicester of vaccine-induced cardiomyopathy. And I will help him to try and get the compensation. But he's just one example of one of my constituents who's probably going to have 30 years of his life stolen off him. His child will lose his father. How is £120,000 of compensation possibly adequate for that? And I certainly will.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for introducing this debate so coherently. But would he be able to explain why Module 4 of the public inquiry into the safety of these vaccines has been arbitrarily postponed from next July? Surely the case he mentions highlights the need for urgent inquiry into this.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise that issue. Why would they put any investigation at the public inquiry, which I think is costing some hundreds of millions of pounds and should be there for the public interest, put that debate back indefinitely? I fear there has been political pressure placed on the inquiry. Clearly, there's a lot of political capital in the run-up to the next election has been placed on the fact that the government and support from the opposition parties did the right thing in our pandemic response, including the rollout of the vaccines. I think that the very fact that they've done this indicates that there is something to hide, and it should make the public extremely suspicious, and I'll be coming on to that shortly. For 2 years, we've turned society upside down so as not to, quote-unquote, kill Granny. Now that Mum and Dad are dying, it appears that no one cares. This is Alice in Wonderland thinking. People in their 50s and 60s, I declare an interest again, normally have many more years of active contribution, I hope so, and deeply fulfilling lives left to live, and these are the people being hit the hardest. Furthermore, the raw number of lives lost is not the only measure we can look at. We have better methods. The most famous method is known as quality-adjusted life years. Those who understand public health generally refer to these as QALYs. QALYs measure healthy years of life lost and are the most sensible metric for properly assessing the impacts of deaths on lost life, on families and on society. QALYs were ignored at the outset. They were ignored in July 2020, when the government's own assessment was that lockdowns would reduce QALYs by about 1 million years. The UK, 1 million years. They were ignored when deciding to inject the young with experimental vaccines, despite the refusal of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation to recommend jabbing under 15s in September 2021. Even at the COVID inquiry, when the Prime Minister tried to raise the issue of quality-adjusted life years, he was shouted down by Hugo Keith, King's Counsel. The lead lawyer at the COVID inquiry, he then revealed his unbelievable, unforgivable, his negligence and his ignorance by saying, I don't want to get into quality life assurance models. This, I repeat, is the most senior lawyer at the so-called COVID inquiry. So when I say future generations will ridicule us, it's not hard to see reasons why. The pandemic, a term which some of our best academics from around the globe questioned from the outset in published and peer-reviewed papers, is over. The crisis has passed, yet still empty vessels continue to drown out intelligent, reasoned expert discourse. Not knowing what equality means is one thing, but parading his ignorance with arrogant disdain ought to disqualify Mr. Keith from any further part in that inquiry. And sadly, his condescending disdain for open inquiry epitomises what many of us have encountered time and time again when raising these issues. We've seen a smorgasbord of fanciful excuses proffered for the rise in heart attacks. Sir Chris Whitty laughably claimed that it was a reduction in statin prescriptions, even though prescribing levels were exactly the same. And it would take years, or even decades, for changes on that issue to take effect and be seen in population mortality data. The media have tried to persuade the people, that eating eggs, or the wrong kind of breakfast, or climate change is to blame. Sir Gary, people are sick of being patronised with these lies. Some have claimed the excess deaths are due to COVID. The literature is littered with studies claiming that COVID causes heart disease. Almost all include COVID cases from spring 2020. It was almost impossible to be tested and become an official case unless you were sick and in hospital. So Gary, proving that sick people get heart disease more than healthy people does not mean that COVID causes heart disease. Indeed, the claims can be easily debunked. Cardiac deaths have seen a steep rise in both Australia and Singapore, as well as the UK. And these countries did not have any significant COVID until 2022, but they did roll out the jabs exactly the same time as we did in the UK. Correlation does not prove causation. We've already heard it in this debate. But correlation with and without COVID can rule out causation. The excess cardiac deaths were certainly not caused by COVID. Some have claimed that the excess deaths were caused by lockdowns. Well, it's well known that psychological stress increases the risk of heart disease. The government subjected people to a massive propaganda campaign of fear, well documented by Laura Dodsworth in her book, State of Fear. We were cut off from our usual support networks. For many, we saw immense financial pressures. Such policies could contribute to heart disease in a minor way. However, the sharpest rise came later, entirely coincident with the jab rollout. So we have a clear temporal link between increased deaths and vaccination. And some have claimed that the excess can't be down to the jabs, because Sweden have not had as many excess deaths as elsewhere, despite having a very similar number of doses per million of the experimental vaccines. But it's important to understand that heart disease is a cumulative risk. In the UK, we already have a serious problem with heart disease before the pandemic. And it's just got much worse following the vaccine rollout. And by contrast, Sweden has the longest healthy life expectancy in Europe. It's no wonder that they are a statistical outlier on excess deaths now. If you're under 50 and you live in Sweden, the chances of dying from heart disease are already half that of a resident of the UK of the same age. Some have admitted to the problem, but claimed it was worth it. Science journalist Tom Chivers even said, regarding jabbing children, it sounds cruel, but a small number of deaths would be worth it. As I pointed out earlier, from China through to the UK, any culture willing to openly sacrifice children for adults is rotten, in my view, to its very core. And look what's happening now. Yet again, we're seeing a peak in COVID hospitalisations, we should be as we should be expecting from a coronavirus in January. The number of people infected and the number of intensive care admissions was about the same every 6 months before and after the vaccinations. The number of COVID intensive care admissions in the January to June of 2020 wave was about the same as the July to December 2020 COVID wave, and remained similar in the January to June 2021 COVID wave, and the July to December 2021 COVID wave. The jab, therefore, had no impact whatsoever. And those interested may wish to consult a recent paper in the Journal of Clinical Medicine that demonstrates exactly this point. And the next important factor is that Omicron is far less deadly. The reason there are fewer COVID deaths now is because Omicron's arrival at the beginning of 2022. But viral waves will continue to come and go until almost everyone has post-infection immunity, and we're not there yet. It's clear that viral waves were not impacted by lockdowns. It's increasingly clear they were not impacted by the jabs either. People have denied that the viral waves peak naturally at predictable times of year. But how much longer can that be denied? The lockdowns did not cause deaths to decline from their peaks in April 2020 because they also peaked and fell in April 2022 and March 2023 without lockdowns. Indeed, in 2020, infections were already falling before the lockdowns were even started. The actual problem with excess deaths started in spring 2021 with the jab rollout. And there was a stepwise rise in ambulance calls for life-threatening emergencies at exactly the same times. Hospitals started to be overwhelmed also for the first time, and the number of people unable to work because of long-term sickness started to rise. Even Mayday calls from aircraft rose. Are we meant to think that this is all a coincidence? When we know that these injections cause a range of serious adverse events, especially cardiac events. No, the excess deaths are the tip of this very ugly iceberg, and we haven't even mentioned the world-shaking scandal of jabbing people who'd already had COVID, which, at a stroke, almost entirely demolishes the credibility of our public health policies at this period. We completely ignored natural immunity. That one fact ought to be a red flag of gigantic proportions, but no one's listening. And I haven't got time to discuss the fact that jab was not pulled when it became clear that an incredible 1 in 800 doses administered led to serious adverse events and consequences. The rotavirus vaccine was pulled entirely after causing an adverse event rate of 1 in 10,000. For the 2009 swine flu vaccine, it was an adverse event of 1 in 35,000 that were harmed, and it was then pulled off the market. The COVID jab is still being pushed, and it's seriously harming people, inevitably at a rate much higher than 1 in 800, because most people are being exposed to multiple doses of the vaccine with the same risk, adverse event risk, at each dose. Thalidomide, syphilis treatment, all these infamous, appalling, shattering medical scandals are dwarfed by the iceberg under the water that is the medical scandal we're currently living through, the experimental COVID-19 so-called vaccines. And it took 11 years after the drug was withdrawn in 1961 for thalidomide scandal was first raised in Parliament. 11 years after the thalidomide scandal, before the word thalidomide could even be mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons. Well, Sir Gary, I'm not going to let that happen this time. That's why I fought so hard to raise this issue in Parliament at a cost to my reputation, my career, and the financial security of my family. The public inquiry should be urgently looking at this issue. Instead, they're wasting taxpayers' money obsessing over WhatsApp messages while people are dying. As if that isn't bad enough, I've already shared with you, we learnt this week that the vaccine module has been postponed indefinitely for no good reason. It's as if the inquiry is so desperate not to find fault that they can't even look at what's happened with the vaccines. We need transparency. Dr. Claire Craig, co-chair of the Heart Group, has been doggedly pursuing the UK Health Security Agency for their record-level data on dosage, dates and deaths for a year. This is the data that could sort out this issue once and for all. They admit they've got it. The MHRA admit that all this data has been released to Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Moderna. Yet they claim they cannot anonymise it for public release to the public. A failure to release this data makes it look like there is definitely something to hide. A recent poll in the USA shows that more than half of the public think the vaccines are responsible for a significant number of deaths. If there was nothing to hide, they would certainly release this data for analysis, anonymised, to stop the upswell of legitimate concern. The latest response from the Information Commissioner's office is that Dr. Claire Craig's got to wait another 6 months at least before a case officer will be assigned to this issue. This is not acceptable, Sir Gary. They've released our health data to Big Pharma, but they won't release it to us. The record data level data must be released. It is really too much to ask. Is it really too much to ask that the British public be given the same level of access to the relevant data given to big pharma companies, those actually responsible for this debacle? Corporations that carefully secured immunity from all legal liability, or in this country, indemnity from the government before dangerously and negligently experimenting on the health of our nation and the world. We're witnesses to the greatest medical scandal in living memory. The consequential fallout in trust, public opinion, and public confidence is only just beginning. Continued attempts to shut down debate, flatten dissent, and obstruct independent analysis can only delay the eventual collective shame. It's going to be a reckoning, and we're going to have to try and rebuild trust in our health services, in our media, and in our politics. And we haven't even started on that journey. So, Gary, before I was expelled from the Conservative Party for voicing my concerns over these experimental vaccines and the harms that I believe they cause, I met with a senior member of the party who, after listening to my concerns about the vaccines and NG163, the midazolam and morphine scandal, told me quite calmly, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you that will entail. So, Gary, I refuse to bow to that threat. And as they say, the rest is history. People have alleged that I'm spouting conspiracy theories. Well, I think it is a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy against the science. It's a conspiracy of silence. And, Sir Gary, it's a conspiracy against the people. And I will have none of it.
Very much. The question is that this House has considered trends in excess deaths. Colleagues, over 9 of you wish to be called. Wind-ups will begin at 10:38. So I'm going to ask you to speak. I'll impose a voluntary time limit of 3 minutes each. I'm going to try and get everybody in if I possibly can. Sir George Howarth.
Thank you, Sir Gary. The honourable gentleman, I'm afraid, is basing his arguments on evidence that is highly controversial and strongly contested as to its reliability. I will shortly explain what I mean by that assertion. I did attend 2 meetings which the honourable gentleman chaired on this issue, the latter of which, late last year, included a panel of, in inverted commas, experts who made presentations. I attended both of those meetings on the basis that I am aware that there are cases in which some people with underlying or pre-existing medical conditions were vaccinated inappropriately, and in some cases with lethal consequences. And I do support the case for some form of restitution for them and their surviving families. At the second meeting, Sir Gary, which the honourable gentleman chaired, which I referred to a moment ago, I was alarmed that some of the evidence given was polemical rather than scientific. The nature of some of the expert presentations caused my alarm specifically to be concerned about the misleading and inaccurate assertions by, for example, Andrew Wakefield on the MMR scandal, which made the link, or tried to make the link, between the vaccination and autism, and was thoroughly discredited subsequently. But the consequence of that, and it's still being felt, is that children aren't being vaccinated, and there is now an upturn in the incidence of measles, in some cases, with serious consequences. The meeting I attended, and I already referred to, involved a number of, again in inverted commas, experts who gave presentations which included data which I'm frankly sceptical about. So I undertook at that meeting to raise my concerns at the data's accuracy with the Office of National Statistics, and I have done so. In a response from Professor Sir Ian Diamond, the National Statistician, he has undertaken to, and I quote from his letter, his reply, consider and investigate any possible misrepresentation of the data, and I'm grateful to Sir Ian for that undertaking. In a report in the Times today, reference is made to a study published in The Lancet that, and I quote, missed COVID vaccines are to blame for 7,000 deaths. That's missed COVID vaccines. 7,000 deaths and hospitalisations. I'm drawing to a close. So and by the way, this evidence involved, I think, 64 million people. Now, the honourable gentleman quotes some research that he refers to based on data which is not reliable. This is a major undertaking published in The Lancet, and it completely makes the opposite point to that of the honourable gentleman.
Speech as short as I possibly can. And I congratulate the member for North West Leicestershire for raising this issue and for his determination to highlight the challenges that we're facing. On the one hand, we might have expected that the pandemic would shorten the lives of a number of our more frail citizens and thus expect a fall in deaths post-pandemic. And we did see this, actually. The ONS reported 608, roughly, 1,000 deaths in England and Wales in 2020, 586,000 in 2021 and 577,000 in 2022. But this was higher than 2019 when there were 531-ish. So that does warrant further inspection. We do expect a fluctuation year on year, and we also expect the total number of deaths to increase year on year as the population increases and ages. We therefore look at the 5-year average, and currently we're using 17, 18, 19, 21 and 22 because of the outliers in 2020. But even then, it's unlikely we'll be exactly average, and we'd expect some years to be higher and lower. The ONS monthly mortality analysis shows that in 2022, there were 32,000 more deaths than the 5-year average, and in January to July 2023, there were 21,809 more. This equates to an annualised figure of around 37,000, but the figures appear to stop in July 2023. Please could the Minister advise why the data series has been discontinued, because it would be helpful if it were not. But these are raw numbers, and we must be cautious, because as the population ages and increases, of course, so will the number of deaths. And the ONS therefore used the ASMR, the age standard mortality rate, which has fluctuated month to month, but is actually down for both 2022 and 2023 when compared with the 5-year average. So overall, when adjusted for age and population size, the number of deaths is not excessive to that which we would expect. But we need to look further at the trends on age and the causes of death to see a fuller picture. Others will speak, no doubt, of rising cardiovascular disease in men and a late presentation of cancers or the rise in liver disease. But as a consultant paediatrician, I'd like to focus on children. The Child Mortality Database, National Child Mortality Database, collates data regarding children's deaths from 0 to 18. Their latest bulletin from March 23 shows there were sadly 3,743 child deaths to the end of March 23, which is an increase of 8% on the previous year. So could the Minister comment on her investigation she's doing into the cause of this increased mortality and what's being done to prevent further deaths? The purpose of CDOP is to investigate these deaths, but the average investigation is taking 392 days, with less than half completed within 12 months and a significant fall in the number being completed within 12 months. Can I ask what she's doing to improve this process? One particularly distressing feature of child death data is that suicide or deliberate self-harm was the primary cause of death between children between 10 and 17 years. Looking at the data, it's getting much worse within children 10 to 14. I understand the government's aware of these figures and is investing in mental health. for children and improving online safety, but we're grateful if the Minister could elaborate further on the steps they're taking to support children and prevent further tragedies. One of the reasons I get exasperated... Sorry, I'm finishing this. One of the reasons I get exasperated with the COVID inquiry is there seems too much focus on who said what to whom. Did someone swear? Did the actors like each other? I'm not that interested. I want to know what lessons can be learned. Was lockdown useful? Is getting children out of school useful? Was the vaccine a suitable thing to give children or not, particularly if they'd had COVID before? These are the answers that we need.
Mr Neil Hanvey.
Thank you, Sir Gary. Time is tight. Chase, if that's okay. So I want to start by paying tribute to the Honourable Gentleman from North West Leicestershire for his courage and determination on this important matter. And I also want to challenge the Honourable Member for Knowsley on his assertion that they were so-called experts at that meeting. They are world-renowned experts in their field. That is just a matter of observable fact. This morning I want to focus on the safe use of novel mRNA agents and concerns over their alleged role driving excess deaths. I should repeat at the outset a point that I have made previously in this place and directly with the Minister, that any agent has the potential to cause harm or injury to the subject. For the avoidance of doubt, the position that I have taken is based on decades of involvement in the management and delivery of clinical trials. Politicians who dismiss these data and emerging clinical evidence are acting in a wholly irresponsible manner and pose a very real threat to the duties of honesty and candour at the heart of good clinical practice. If substantiated, these concerns surfacing around falsified or concealed data are the most serious I can imagine. Yes, I'll give way.
I wonder, he's defending the experts. Has he actually checked up their backgrounds? And has he checked out the criticisms that have come to them and the fact that in some cases they've had their medical practitioner status withdrawn?
I'm not going to get into the detail of that. I've got far too short a period of time and too many important points to make. But I have worked in the same institution as Professor Dalgleish, and his credentials are impeccable. Politicians who dismiss these data and evidence are acting.
Thank you very much. Minister, to respond, Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire for securing this debate. It's an important debate. We've had a number of debates. I responded to him very briefly in October on his adjournment debate, and acknowledging that he's absolutely correct. There is an increase in excess deaths, and we take that very seriously. I take that seriously as a minister, but also from my clinical background as well. And just to echo the thoughts of many honourable members this morning around lessons to be learnt from the COVID period, I too, as the Minister for Pandemic Preparedness, would like some answers and advice for any future pandemics around the impacts of lockdowns, face masks, timings of vaccine rollouts. And while it is an independent inquiry, the focus on those issues would be extremely helpful to me as a minister. I will, not for the moment, let me just answer as many points as I can from honourable members, because there are a number of increase in excess deaths, but there's a number of factors contributing to that. We do take it seriously and we are monitoring it constantly. If we look at the last year, for example, there's been a high flu prevalence last winter. There were still ongoing challenges of incidence of COVID-19. There was a strep A outbreak, particularly in children. And so we know that they have had an impact. And the statistics from the Office for Health Improvement and Disparity show that last year there were almost 26,400 excess deaths in England. And of those, 7,300 were due to acute respiratory infections, including flu and pneumonia. Last winter, the number of positive tests for flu peaked at 31.8%, the highest figure in the last 6 years. And there's schools of thoughts on that, in fact, that people were locked down, they weren't exposed to flu for a couple of years, and so their immune systems struggled to cope. That is why this year we have learnt those lessons, and we brought forward our flu vaccination programme. We've successfully vaccinated over 17.6 million people since the campaign started in September. And we are seeing this winter, touch wood, Sir Gary, it's still early in the winter season, but we are seeing less admissions from flu and COVID than we did last year. So we are learning the lessons from those excess deaths. It is also the case that There are excess deaths from cardiovascular disease, as been pointed out in the debate. There's 6% higher than expected in England, with almost 13,500 excess deaths that were attributed to cardiovascular disease. There is an impact of lockdown on that. We know that people weren't getting their cholesterol tested, their blood pressure checked, were still smoking. There weren't the antihypertensives being prescribed, the statins, the blood pressure checks. And again, we have taken action, as the Honourable Member for South West Bedfordshire pointed out. We're supporting local authorities to resume our normal NHS health care checks. Between April and June in the last year, we've seen the highest number of checks being offered since the programme began in 2013. We're investing £17 million in innovative new digital health checks to be rolled out this spring, which will deliver an additional 1 million checks in the first 4 years. We've got a 10 million pilot to deliver up to 150,000 cardiovascular disease checks in the workplace, with free blood pressure checks being rolled out to people over 40 in community pharmacies. And we're investing £645 million to include blood pressure checks, again, in our community pharmacy facilities. And that's in addition to the work the Prime Minister's doing, which he announced around smoke-free generations, which will be debated further, but which we want to see rates of smoking reduce further. But I will turn to the elephant in the room around the COVID vaccine, because I know the Honourable Gentleman has raised his concerns, as have other Honourable Members, about safety around COVID vaccines. It is true that from the Office of National Statistics, which was published only in August, that it shows that people who've had a COVID-19 vaccine have a lower mortality rate than those that haven't been vaccinated. And just to the point the Honourable Member for Bosworth made in an intervention, it is true to say, and the Honourable Gentleman from North West Leicestershire is absolutely correct, that there is a high number of people who've been vaccinated who appear in the excess death population. But when 93.6% of the population have had at least one dose of COVID vaccine, there will be a high rate of vaccination in excess death numbers. But that is prevalence, that is not causality. And it's important in this debate that we do look at the causes of excess death and tackle them. I will give way just briefly.
Caroline Johnson.
The lady is saying that, the Minister is saying that the number of people dying who are vaccinated is higher than the people who are not, and that's to be expected because they are more likely to be older and frailer. Does she have any data which adjusts for age and frailty to say whether the vaccinated population are more or less likely to die?
I don't have those figures on me, but I'm very happy to write with her with that information. But I'm not saying that there's a higher rate if people are vaccinated. I'm saying there's a high number of people appearing in the excess death figures because 93.6% of the population were indeed vaccinated. That does not link to causality. It shows a high prevalence instead. And just to reiterate, no vaccine, I'll just give away one more time.
Thank the Minister for giving way. And just on that very point, should, during the public inquiry, there not been a greater importance upon investigating the excess deaths as opposed to keeping it and delaying that as part of the inquiry?
Minister.
Well, the public inquiry is independent and the government is under heavy scrutiny from the inquiry, so it's not for me to say how they should conduct the inquiry. But we, as a government, are looking at the causes of excess deaths, and where we can introduce urgent measures to reverse that as quickly as possible, we're doing so. But just on the COVID vaccine point, no medicine or vaccine, even the simple paracetamol, is completely risk-free. And so we do have systems in place continually monitoring the safety of our medicines. And just to highlight one of the measures that we did make when reports either through the yellow card system, through GPs, through clinicians raised about the AZ vaccine, just to say, can I just make this point, that in April 2021, the MHRA reacted to rare cases of concurrent thrombosis and thrombocytopenia following the AZ vaccine, which resulted in action that adults under 30 were not being offered the vaccine any further. And in May of that year, this was increased to adults under 40. So where there is concern, we will take action and take recommendations from bodies like the MHRA to make sure that those vaccines are as safe as they can be. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. It's really important, and she knows as well as I do, the yellow card scheme sits at the heart of safe clinical care. But there's allegations circulating that the MHRA is sitting on yellow cards related to the COVID-19 vaccine that are 50 times greater than any other vaccine that's been reported into them. Will she commit to asking the MHRA to account for this and to take urgent action if indeed they are sitting on the yellow card system reports?
Okay, thank you. So Gary has reminded me we've got 2 minutes left. I will absolutely take that his point. You know, if people have got concerns, I'm more than happy to raise them with organisations or to answer to honourable and right honourable members. But just to highlight that if you look at the vaccine damage payment scheme, while we had over 8,000 claims so far, 4,000 of those have been rejected either because of causality or because of the impact of severity. 159 have been awarded. 156 of those are for the AZ vaccine, 2 for Pfizer, 1 for Moderna. So as well as the information that the MHRA are collecting, we're analysing the vaccine damage payment scheme as well to keep constantly reviewing the safety of the vaccines there. But can I just make one point? I can't remember which honourable member said it. We must be careful in the language we use. We have a measles outbreak at the moment in this country affecting young children, particularly high outbreaks in London and the West Midlands. Now, thankfully, it's mild in most cases, but children can die. They can have long-term side effects. And there is a danger that if we are not careful with the language used, absolutely scrutinise the safety, but we do need to make sure that we are not deterring parents from coming forward. And we're seeing outbreaks that we nearly eradicated measles, and we're seeing outbreaks because of concerns about vaccinations. And we all have a duty to make sure that we, while we have concerns, that we also have responsibilities as well. So just to touch on 2 minutes left, one quick point. If there are clinicians and experts who've got concerns, just to point them to the funding that we have available for the National Institute for Health and Care Research. There's £110 million allocated for COVID-19 vaccine research. I would encourage them to make use of that fund to develop our knowledge further. And just to reassure Sir Gary, colleagues, that absolutely acknowledge that there is a risk in excess deaths, that we are working towards how we reduce that as quickly as possible, and the effects of lockdown have had a negative effect in many cases. We're also mindful of the safety of vaccinations, and we have taken action when safety concerns have been raised. And just a final point to the Honourable Member for Watford around coronial delays. It's a matter for the Ministry of Justice, but if he wants to write to me with the details of his case, I'm very happy to take it up with the Ministry of Justice. So to thank the Honourable Member for bringing this case, my door is open, and I'm very happy to continue a discussion with him on this issue.
Thank you very much. Andrew Bridgen will have the final say. Andrew.
As it always should be, Sir Gary. It's been excellent, your chairmanship of this debate. I have been extremely impressed with the turnout, which is far in excess of my expectations. I'd like to congratulate all right and right honourable members who've attended, especially those who've made these contributions to the debate, and I'd like to thank the Shadow Minister and the Minister for their participation. Respectfully, I would advise the front bench spokespeople that not taking interventions does not fill colleagues with confidence, and it won't fill the wider public with confidence either on these matters, that the spokespeople are being open and transparent. And if we want to reassure the people, they need to have confidence in us moving forward. Clearly, time has been of short supply. 3 minutes for backbench contributions was insufficient. And I do hope that all those present here in this chamber today, and others who haven't been able to attend but wanted to speak, would support an immediate call for a 3-hour debate in the main chamber. That, I think, would treat the whole issue of trends in excess deaths with the reverence and the time and respect that our constituents demand, and that we need to make those contributions and get to the absolute truth. Because I'm saddened that I do not believe this trend in excess death is going to stop anytime soon. In fact, I think it's going to continue, and the concern from our constituents is only going to escalate. The Minister talked about the elephant in the room, the vaccine harms. It's that bad, and it's going to get that bad, that even the elephant in the room has died suddenly, apparently. The Minister could sort all this out if her department, if you were to tell those data holders to release the record level data, the vaccine records, the date of vaccination, the age of the vaccinated, what they were vaccinated.